first met Gene, he was pushing a broom down the corridor, sweeping up after lunch, and humming the theme from the bridge over the River Kwai. His head full of gray hair bobbed from side to side as he hummed. He was probably in his late 60s, maybe early 70s, but he still had a little pep in his step. As he got closer to me, he said the little speech that all men in the institution gave when they first met you. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm inmate 3472, and I'm doing a life sentence for murder." The next time I saw Gene, he wasn't pushing a broom, but he was being pushed in a wheelchair by another inmate. His head that was once full of gray hair now didn't have quite so much on it, and he could barely keep his head straight as it bobbed front to back on his now pencil-thin neck. As they approached me, he said, "Good morning, ma'am. I'm inmate 34... He coughed, and he choked a little bit. And the other inmate said, "He's inmate 3472, and he's doing a life sentence for murder." The last time I saw Gene, he had no gray hair left, and he couldn't even hold his head up. It just hung there as a small trail of drool dripped from his lips when he would grunt. Gene died a few weeks after that. He was actually only 62 when he died. How many of you often think about getting old? If and when you do, you probably think about those around you who love you, who will take care of you. But how many of you have often thought about getting old in prison? Or getting sick in prison? Or dying in prison? Who takes care of them? In 2017, there were nearly 200,000 individuals considered elderly in prisons. By the year 2030, estimates indicate that we will see a rise of almost 4,400%. What this means is we're seeing lots of older... Oh, wait a minute. I forgot to tell you. The body tends to physiologically age 10 to 15 years faster than the non-incarcerated population. What this means is we are seeing people in their 40s and 50s with diseases of old age, like dementia, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. The bottom line is that we as a society are seeing an enormous amount of individuals who are getting sick. And it is the taxpayer who is responsible for them. Ruby was 58 and suffering from rheumatoid arthritis. Her hands were so gnarled, she couldn't pick up an eating utensil. She could only eat at dinner times like a dog, pushing her food around her plate with her tongue and her paws. With only 30 minutes to eat, she rarely got enough food. And by the age of 59, she was so malnourished that she had a massive stroke. But why was Ruby in prison anyway? I mean, she must have done something horrible to be in prison for life. Well, Ruby was in prison for something that if she did it nowadays, she might not even see the inside of a city jail cell. But it was 1937, and Ruby had shot her husband after he had beaten her and their child so severely that responding law enforcement couldn't tell the gender of the swollen, bloodied child. When the guards found Ruby the next morning, she was lying in her cell alone. Her prison uniform was soaked in urine and feces, and she had died there by herself, looking up at a picture of her now adult daughter. In the 1970 Supreme Court, Estelle versus Gamble, the High Court determined that the deprivation of health care to inmates constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. In 2017, the United Nations Commission on Criminal Justice gave us what we now call the Mandela Rules. These rules mandate the minimum amounts of care that we give to people within our prison system. So, if we can't ignore the problem, and we're mandated to a certain level of care, what can we do with them in the United States and abroad, whereby prisons are putting in hospice programs to care for the aging and dying behind bars? Inmates are provided with palliative care, not curative care, and they are taught to care for each other. And most importantly, no one dies alone. Within prisons, we find that healthy prisoners will cost the U.S. taxpayer about $60,000 per inmate per year. But these individuals are not healthy by any stretch of the imagination. And these sick inmates can cost us more like $160,000 per inmate per year for health care alone. What my research found is that these hospice units inside prisons can shave off sometimes nearly 1/3 of the prison health care budget. But there was something else. More interestingly enough, these prison hospice programs change the culture of the prison. We see a lower inmate-on-inmate violence, lower statistics on employee turnover, and overall safer prisons. But why? Well, the research has shown that the number one fear of inmates going into prison is not to be beaten or shanked or even raped. But the number one fear that inmates have going into the prison system is the stigma of dying alone in prison. When we teach prisoners to care for each other, we take away that fear. And we alleviate one of the biggest stressors in inmate life. Shame and fear are pervasive inside prisons. And by taking away that fear, prisoners are profoundly changed. The hands that once hurt other people are now used to help, to heal, and to care. So, why is prison hospice an idea worth spreading? Because, my friends, compassion is worth spreading. I've taught 50-year-old men the difference between good touch and bad touch, and then watch them fall apart when they admit to me they'd never even experienced the feeling of a simple hug. Hospice teaches them and reminds us that death doesn't care about our station in life, how much we have in our bank account, or how many friends we have. Hospice reminds us all that we all breathe the same air, whether inside or outside of a prison cell. I'd like to end today with a quote by one of the most famous prisoners in the world. Nelson Mandela said, "One should not judge a nation until you've been inside their prisons and jails. One cannot judge a nation by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones." Thank you.